Okay, أهلا وسهلا. Welcome. Let's get this iPad going. Okay, الفعل المضارع. In today's lesson, we are going to be talking about present tense verbs. And in the vocab lesson, we found that we came across 9 different present tense verbs, all new verbs in this chapter. So what we are going to be doing in this lesson, we're going to be talking about the conjugations for those verbs, and then we're going to be discussing a little bit of grammar when it comes to the structure of these verbs. Okay, so we have الفعل المضارع, present tense verbs. We're going to come back to the verb stems and patterns, and right now what I want to look at are verb conjugations. So go ahead and take out your notes. And we're going to start with a couple of verbs. I'm not going to give you all of the verbs, but I do have a PDF that has this chart so that you can fill in the chart for yourself. Okay, so we have الفعل يعرف. يعرف meaning he knows. And I take this out of it. There we go. Okay. يعرف, he knows. Okay, we're going to go through and we're going to just practice our conjugations, how we change the verb depending on the person who is doing the action. We already know this, and the chart that I have here for you guys, you should already know. We have the first row, we call this al-mutakallim. This is first person, when you are speaking or we are speaking. Then the second row that we have here is what we call al-mukhatib, which is second person, when you're talking to someone. And the last 3 that we have here are al-ghaib, third person, when you're talking about someone. And then we have here al-mufrad, which is singular when it's one person. And we have al-jama here, which is plural when it's multiple. And for the plural, we're talking about 3 or more. There's actually another one in between, which is the dual, when you have 2 people. And we haven't covered the dual yet, so we're not going to worry about that. Okay, so I have highlighted in red all of the prefixes. Remember, we're talking about fi'l mudari'. Mudari' is present tense. So this whole lesson right now is on present tense. I know we also looked at past tense in the vocab video, but today we're only looking at the present tense verbs. Okay, so in present tense, all of the verbs, anytime we change it for a person, it's always going to take a prefix. That's why the very first letter of all of these is always going to change. And then a couple of them take a suffix. These are these 3. Okay, anti, antum, and hum. So let's go through them. This should feel like review. Ana a'arif. So we have the verb is ya'arif. And if I want to change it, for ana, all we do is we take that first letter and we change it to an alif hamza. That's the prefix for ana. You guys already know this. Everything else stays the same. So notice this verb had a fatha on the first letter. It has a sukoon on the ayn. It has a kasra on the ra. And then it has the letter tha. Everything else stays exactly the same. So if you look at it like, actually let me do it like this. If you look at it like this. Oops. Don't want a paintbrush. Like that. Ya'arif. The only thing you're changing is what's in red. This, what's in red, that's what's changing, right? We changed it to an alif hamza here for ana. Everything else stays the same. Al-harakat, al-fatha, al-sukun, al-kasra, all of the markings that you have stay the same, and the letters all stay the same. It's just plugging and chugging. That's all it is. So we have ana a'arif. We just changed out this ya to an alif. Notice, because alif doesn't connect, that's why we have the ayn here is not connected to the alif. Ana a'arif. Nahnu. Nahnu. Same exact thing, but with a nun. Na'arif. We know. We know. Ana, I know. Okay. Anta. So now we're moving into second person when I'm talking to someone. Anytime you think of second person, you think to someone. That person is in front of you. Okay? Anta, anti, and antum. Notice, for second person, all 3 of them, there we go, All three of them, anytime you have second person, always starts with ta. Think of ta as two. You're talking to the person, so it's always going to start with the ta. أنت تعرف. أنتِ, when you're talking to someone who's a woman, we're going to add a ya noon to the end. تعرفين. Okay. أنت تعرف. أنتِ تعرفين. So you know. This one is going to be you feminine. No. Okay. أنتِ تعرفين. So if I'm talking to Rayan, she's a girl, I'm talking to her. I say أنتِ تعرفين. هل تعرفين اللغة العربية? Do you know Arabic? Right, so I'm asking her directly. It's to her. أنتم, same thing. We start with the ta, but because it's plural, or it's more than one person. Remember, when we have the plural in verbs, we add waw nun. Okay, so أنتم تعرفون. So we start with the ta, we just add the waw nun. أنتم تعرفون. هو يعرف. This is the default of the verb. The default is always with the huwa form, so it starts with the ya. هو يعرف. هي تعرف with the ta. We call this ta at-ta'nith. It's the feminine ta. One thing to notice here. هي تعرف. This verb تعرف and أنت تعرف, the verbs are conjugated exactly the same. How can you tell the difference? Simply by context. In this one, the ta in the beginning is for to when you're talking to someone, and in this one, the ta is the feminine ta. Okay, so there are tas that function in different ways, but of course, in terms of the way the verb looks and is said, it's exactly the same. Okay, and hum, يعرفون. So we have hum, we take the huwa form, which is يعرف, and then we simply add to it, we have the ya, and then we simply add to it waw nun. Okay, hum يعرفون. So we'll say them. أنا أعرف. You want to repeat after me. أنا أعرف. نحن نعرف. أنت تعرف. أنتِ تعرفين. أنتم تعرفون. هو يعرف. هي تعرف. هم يعرفون. Okay, so now let's practice with some other verbs. Here's a fresh chart, so you can look at the chart. I'm going to give you the verb, then you pause, fill it out, and then come back. So I'll give you the verb يسافر. And actually, I'm going to give it to you because it came in your chapter as أسافر, I travel. I'll say أسافر, and then we know here that that أسافر is I travel. So I'm going to put it in the أنا spot. Oops. أسافر. And if you want to write إلى, because أسافر always comes with the preposition إلى. أسافر إلى. Okay. أنا أسافر إلى. I'm traveling to. So you're going to pause the video and then come back and see how you did. Okay. So notice here. In this verb, you have, this is what we call the stem of the verb, سافر. So all of them are going to take that. Just like in here, the stem was عرف. Okay? So we have عين راء فاء, and we just added. So in this one, we have سافر. We're just adding the prefix to it. So here's your prefix. And what do? نحن نسافر. نحن نسافر إلى. أنت, أنتِ, and أنتم all start with ta. So let's look. What do we have? أنت تسافر إلى. أنتِ, oops, أنتِ تسافر. What do we add to the end? Yeah, noon, ra doesn't connect. That's why we don't connect it. تسافرين. أنتم تسافر. It's plural. What do we add? تسافرون. You all are traveling. Y'all are traveling. هو starts with ya. هي starts with ta. هو يسافر إلى. And of course, if you want to put all the حركات, you can. يسافر إلى. هي تسافر إلى. Hum also starts with a ya, so it's the same thing here, but we end it with the plural. So we start with a ya. Hum يسافرون. أرواون يسافرون. Okay, let's do another verb. Let's do the verb يتذكر. يتذكر, he remembers. يتذكر, he remembers. So notice the stem of the verb, okay? The stem of the verb is تذكر. So everything in blue is the stem. Everything that's in blue is going to stay exactly the same for all of them. The only thing that's going to change is this first letter. That's it. So for every single one of these, you should have this stem, تذكر. Oops. Keep moving that. All of them, right, should have this stem. But what changes is the first letter. So in this right here, we had يتذكر, which is the huwa form, which is down here. Huwa يتذكر, because remember when you start with the ya, that's the huwa form, the he remembers, it's the default. And your harakat are the same for all of them, يتذكر. So if I change that ya for ana, what letter does it change to? Good, ana. And alif doesn't connect, so that's why we're not connecting it. أتذكر. أنا أتذكر. نحن, add a noon to the beginning. نتذكر. أنا أتذكر. نحن نتذكر. Okay. أنت. So now the same thing here. We have the stem of the verb stays the same. So I'm going to put تذكر on all of these, so that you remember that this right here is the stem. This remains the same. It's just the first letter that we're changing. So if I say anta, okay, if I say anta, what letter do we start for anta, anti, and antum? A ta. Very good. So all of these are going to start with a ta. There's two tas. Someone's going to ask the question, well, there's two of them. Why can't we put shadda? You can never start a word with a shadda, because anytime you have a shadda on a letter, like right here, تذكر, أتذكر. Shadda means that first you stop on that letter from the letter before, and then you pronounce it a second time with whatever vowel is there. So here's a fatha. So we're taking the dal, we stop on the kaf. أتذكر. You can't have a shadda in the beginning because there's nothing you can stop. You can't stop on the first letter. So that's why we don't write it. So تتذكر. أنتِ تتذكرين. أنتم تتذكرون. Simple. هو يتذكر. هي starts with the ta. Again. تتذكر. Okay, تتذكر. هم, similar to يتذكر, we start with a ya, but we end with waw noon here. هم يتذكرون. Okay. هم يتذكرون. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do another one of the long ones. يستمع إلى. All of these verbs end, the last letter ends with a dhamma, but if you want to pronounce it with the sukun, you can do that too. You don't have to pronounce it, you can stop on يستمع إلى. You could say it like that. So in يستمع إلى, the ya here is for right here. هو. It's the هو form. So right here. هو. Oops. هو يستمع إلى. He's listening to or he listens to. So you're going to pause and you're going to come back. Fill in the chart and then come back. Okay, so here the stem is everything that's in green. All of that stays the same. It's just the very first letter that changes, right? So in huwa, we had the ya. If we change it to alif hamza for ana, we change it here. We keep the fatha. Notice all of the harakat stay exactly the same. And then we write the stem. Ana أستمع إلى. I listen to. أنا أستمع إلى الموسيقى في الصباح. أستمع. نحن, what letter will it start with? نون. نحن نستمع إلى. أنت, أنتِ, أنتم all start with ta, all of them. أنت تستمع إلى. أنتِ, what do we do? تستمعين. We add that suffix here. يا نون. تستمعين. أنتم تستمعون. تستمعون. Meaning, y'all listen to. Can I write in English? Y'all listen to. Remember, all of these will have إلى. Okay. هو يستمع إلى. هي starts with ta, تستمع إلى. وهم, we start with a ya, just like we had in هو. And then what do? We add the plural واو نون. يستمعون إلى. They listen to. Okay. So in all of the verbs, now what you can do is all of the verbs that we've done. You've seen verbs like يحفظ or أحفظ, I remember, or I'm memorizing, sorry, I memorize. And you saw the verb أكتب. And we did أشرب, I'll put them all in أنا for now. I drink. All these different verbs that we have now, you can be able to conjugate all of them. And notice that it's the very first letter that's changing. Everything else stays the same. All the rest of the letters and the harakat, all of that stay the same. Okay, so now let's practice using these in context. So how do we figure out what verb do we use? Okay. That's a typo. Okay, so المثال. لا أتذكر اسمه. I don't remember his name. So here's the verb أتذكر, and it has alif hamza because I'm saying I don't remember. So you're going to look at, each of these, and we're going to change the verb. We're going to keep the same exact verb, but we're simply changing it for who it is that's doing it. Maha la اسم زوجة عمها. So we want to say Maha doesn't, and we want to use the same verb. Doesn't remember. اسم زوجة عمها. Name, wife, her uncle. Meaning her uncle's wife's name. Or the name of the wife of her uncle. Remember, Am is on which side of the family? في عائلة الوالد أو الوالدة. في عائلة الوالد. So that is her dad's brother. So her dad's brother, his wife, her name. That's the thing she doesn't remember. Okay, so we take the verb أتذكر. If I'm saying maha, so the way that you want to do this, if you're still confused, think about what pronoun is associated with that person. So if I say maha, would it be maha I don't remember? How would we say maha doesn't remember? It's maha she doesn't remember. So the pronoun here is hiya. So remember for hiya, what did we start with? We started with the ta. So we look at this verb and we say, okay, we're going to change that first letter. Just going to erase this so I have some room. We're going to change that first letter to a ta and keep everything else exactly the same. تتذكر. مها لا تتذكر اسم زوجة عمها. So I'm actually not going to give you a couple minutes. You're going to give yourself a couple of minutes. So pause the video, answer these, and then come back. لا عنوانك. And I gave you the pronoun. The pronoun here is نحن. So we want to say we don't know, we don't remember. عنوان, what was عنوان? ما معنى عنوان? Address. So we're saying we don't remember your address. So we're saying it'll start with the letter نون. نتذكر. لا نتذكر عنوانك. 3. هل حسن blank أسماء زملائه. أسماء زملائه. So أسماء are names. زملاء are peers, and this he is right here, his friends' names. That's an example of إضافة, which we did in the last chapter. So does Hassan, we're saying, does Hassan remember his friends' names? I hope so. So it starts with a ya. يتذكر. حسن. هل حسن يتذكر أسماء زملائي؟ الطلاب. This is a plural. And then are we saying the students we, the students y'all, or the students they? We're talking about the students. If it was ya طلاب, that would mean y'all. Oh students, you guys. But I'm not saying oh students, I'm just talking about them. So it's third person. We conjugate it for hum. And in hum, we start with a ya, and we end in waw noon. So we take a ya, and then we have يتذكر, and we add waw noon. يتذكرون. الطلاب يتذكرون كل الكلمات. The students remember all of the words. Okay. تمرين 12. ماذا يفعلون? What are they doing? This is one that you're going to be doing for homework. So I'm just going to go over the first 2 with you. So in this one, you have a blank, and you have to pick any verb that we've done. So any of the new verbs that we've done. So if you look at the vocab list from Unit 4 vocab, there's 9 vocab words. We went over them in the list. And then any words that we've done before. يسكن, to live. Right? يعمل, to work. يعرف, to know. Any of those verbs that we've done before, those are fair game too. So use any of the verbs that we have done up until now, and you're going to pick from those verbs. Okay, so نحن blank الأردن كل سنة. الأردن is Jordan. So we something Jordan every year. So what do? Some might say visit. We haven't done the verb to visit yet. So what's the verb that we could use here? We just learned it. Travel. We travel to Jordan. Because it's نحن, we start with noon. نحن نسافر إلى, remember it has to have the إلى. نحن نسافر إلى الأردن كل سنة. Remember when we have كل and a singular word, every, means each or every. Okay, دائما الموسيقى في سيارتي. What do we do to the music in the car? Listen. Who's the person listening here? Who should you conjugate it for? في سيارتي means my car. So most likely you're saying, I always listen. دائما means always. دائما, remember, is one of those words, it can go anywhere in the sentence. We can say أنا دائما or دائما أنا, or you could even put دائما at the end. You could use it wherever. But because it's أنا, we're going to start with ألف همزة. I'm going to put it here. And the verb is to listen. أنا دائما أستمع إلى الموسيقى في سيارتي. If you want to say دائما نستمع إلى الموسيقى, we listen to music in my car. That could work. Okay. So what you're doing is you're picking the verb that fits, and then you're going to change it for the person that fits. Okay, so those are verb conjugations. So now what we're going to go into, let me switch the screen here. Now what we're going to go into is verb patterns. We're going to talk about verb patterns and stems. We call this الجذر والوزن. الجذر والوزن. So here we have أوزان الفعل are your verb patterns. So in Arabic, most of the words that you have form a trilateral three-letter, meaning it's a three-letter root. Okay, so most of the words that you have three basic letters that it derives its meaning from. Okay, and then all the other words that you get from those three letters, we call them the derivatives. Okay, mushtaqat. So these are letters that come from those three-letter roots. So if you look at all of these words in this little whiteboard, I want you to look at all those words, pause the video, and answer the question. What three letters do all of these words share? And the second is, what's the meaning that all of them are related to? So pause and come back. Okay. So let's look at the words we have. كاتب, كاتب, يكتب, المكتب, كتب, المكتبة, تكتبون. So you look at all of these and say, what are the three letters that are in every single one of these verbs? The three letters that are in all of these words. The letter kaf, very good. Katib, here you have a kaf. 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 And a kaf. A ta, very good. That's the second letter that all of them have. They all have a kaf and a ta. Kaf, ta. Kaf, ta. Kaf, ta. And they all have the letter ba. Kaf, ta, ba. Kataba. Those three letters are what we call al-jadha. That is the root of the word. That is the most basic part of the word that all of these words share. And it's what gives the meaning. Okay? Now, if you look at these, there's extra letters, right? So this one has an alif. Do all of the words have an alif? This one has a ya. Do all of them have a ya? This one has an alif lam. Do all of them have alif lam? How about a meme? Some have them, most do not. Ta marbuta, one has it. Right? So all of the other letters that we have beyond those three root letters, those are all extra. And those extra letters are what give different meanings to the root letter. So what does kataba probably mean? What is the meaning that's related to all of these words? So let's look at we'll start in the middle. Yaktub. Ma ma'ana yaktub? It's a verb and it means to write. So yaktub is he writes. Al-maktab. Al-maktab can be a desk. It can also be an office. Taktubun is also writes, but it's ta and waw noon. So it's y'all write. You guys are writing. Al-maktaba. Ma ma'ana al-maktaba? Library. Kutub. Kitab, jama' kutub, books. And katib is a new word you might not know. A katib is a writer. So what do they all have to do with? They all have to do with writing. The verb itself, yaktub, means to write. You all are writing, that's to write. Katib is a person who writes. Kutub are books, things that are written. Al-maktaba, library, is a place where written things are stored. Al-maktab is a desk where you use to sit and write. Right? So all of these words have to do with writing. But the meaning of the words change slightly depending on these additional letters that we add. So whether it's to write, whether it's something that's written, or a person that's right, or a person who writes, or a place where you write, right? All of those kind of words change based on the letters that you add to the root. That is the essence of the root and the roots and patterns. So we call the root al-jadar. So in this case, kaf, ta, ba. And all of the words are built around the root letters that are related to writing. Now, al-wazan. So that's what we call al-jadar. The wazan is what we call the pattern. So when you take the root letters and you put it in this pattern, then you create meaning. Okay? So kataba has to do with writing. When you place it in a pattern, then it changes the meaning, and it creates that meaning of whether it's to write, or he writes, or they write, or writer, or written, or books, things that are written, right? So that is what gives the meaning. So the root, what we essentially do is we have those root letters, al-jadar, which we had here, kaf, ta, ba. So notice we have 3 letters, 1, 2, 3. Those 3 root letters are represented by the letter fa, ain, lam. The first root letter is represented by fa, the second root letter is represented by ain, and the third root letter is represented by lam. Fa, ain, lam. And when you have a word and you want to figure out what the pattern is, all you do is you simply replace the root letters with fa, ain, lam. And that's what will give you the pattern that that word follows. Okay, so if I will write here and show you the example. What's up? So if I take that same example that we have here, we have the word yaktub. Would help if my pen works. There we go. Okay, so here's yaktub. This right here is the word. You look at the word and we say, okay, we already figured out the root for this word. So the root for this word was what? It was 3 letters, kaf, ta, and ba. That is what we call the root. So this is al-jadar. This right here is the word, the original word that we're talking about, al-kalima. So that we've now figured out the pattern, we've now figured out the root, al-jadar. Now I want to ask you, what pattern does this word yaktub follow? What pattern does it follow? And the pattern that it follows, all we do to figure out the pattern is we rewrite the word yaktub, but we replace the kaf with a fa, because that represents the first root letter. We replace the ta with an ain, because that represents the second root letter. And the ba with a lam, because that represents the third root letter. This is just so that you can have a basic structure to figure out what all the patterns are. So we take this. We have a ya with a fatha. Let me do a different color now. We have a ya with a fatha. And then we have a kaf with a sukun. Kaf is the first root letter, so we're going to replace it here with a fa. And it has a sukun on it, so we're going to keep the sukun right on top of it. And then we have the letter ta, that's the second root letter, right? We said this is right here, the second root letter. We're going to replace it with an ain. So I'm going to write an ain here. Let me put it in red. And what vowel was on top of the second letter was a lamma, so I'm going to keep the lamma there. And then the last root letter, we're going to replace it here with the lam. And the pattern that we get is yaf'ul. So what we say is that the verb yaktub, its jadar, its root letters are kaf, ta, ba. And the pattern which it follows is يفعل, in which you have the three root letters. يفعل, fa, ain, lam represent the first, second, and third root letter. So what this pattern is telling you is that the verb has a ya with a fatha, and then it has a letter with a sukun, a letter with a dhamma, and the third letter. That is the pattern that this word follows. Okay? So another thing, this is kind of like math. If I said, here's the root is kataba, and the pattern is yaf'ul. Okay? The root is kataba, and the pattern is yaf'ul. So this right here, we call this al-wazan. Al-wazan is the pattern. So we have the pattern, the word, and the root letters. If I give you the root and I give you the pattern, all you have to do is plug the root into the pattern where you replace the fa, ain, lam with those root letters. And what will you get? You'll get the word. If you take the word and replace it with fa, ain, lam, then you'll get the pattern. Okay. So let's look at some other examples then. Here's a common pattern that we have. Okay, fa'il. Fa'il is a very common adjective pattern in which, remember, we said that fa represents first letter, ain second letter, and the lam the third of the root letters. These represent the root letters. So fa'il is a pattern in which you have the root letter here, first root letter, the second root letter, followed by a ya, and the third root letter. So here's the pattern. And I also wrote it as 1, 2, the letter ya, and the third letter. So the first letter has a fatha, you have the second root letter, followed by a ya, and the third root letter. Remember, 1, 2, 3. That's the pattern. This is the wazan. So now we want al-kalima. We want to figure out what's a word that fits this pattern. Think of some adjectives that you know that rhyme. Another way to think of wazan is they rhyme, words that rhyme. So what are some words that rhyme with fa'il, where they have a letter that starts with a fatha, the second letter has the letter ya after it, and then the last letter? What is the word for big? Kabir. Kabir, you have a letter that has a fatha. You have a second letter followed by a ya, and then the third. Kabir follows this pattern. So what would the root letters of the word kabir be? The root letters are represented by 1, 2, 3. Fa, ain, lam. The ya here is what is added. It's the extra. So the root here would be ka, ba, ra, which has to do with bigness. What's the opposite of kabir? Opposite is صغير. This follows the same exact pattern. The first letter has a fatha, then you have the second root letter followed by the letter ya, and the third root letter. Same pattern. Okay. What's the adjective for beautiful? Jameel. Again, same exact pattern. First letter, second letter, followed by a ya. Jameel. What's the word for far? Ba'id. Same thing. First letter has a fatha, second letter, followed by the letter ya, and the third letter. So the pattern that all of these adjectives follow is fa'il, meaning the first root letter has a fatha, followed by the second root letter with a ya, and the third root letter. Why is this important? It's important for two reasons. One, the root is what tells you what the general meaning is. So kaf, ba, ra, the root of kabir, has to do with bigness. right? So كبير is the adjective for big. صغير, صاد, غين, ra has to do with being small or smallness. So صغير is the adjective that means small, right? Same with right here, جميل. Jim, mim, lam has to do with beauty. Jamil is then the adjective that means beautiful. So the root of the word gives you what type of meaning that word's going to be derived from. The pattern tells you what type of word is it. Is it an adjective? Is it a verb? Is it a noun of place? Right? Is it a noun of time? Like the type of word, excuse me, that word is based on al-wazn, the pattern. Okay. Here's another. Here's a pattern. The pattern is fa'alan. Fa'alan is a pattern that is also an adjective pattern. It's a common adjective pattern. And it's an adjective pattern that usually is for adjectives that exist temporally. They're temporary. Okay? Whereas fa'il is an adjective that exists more permanently. Okay? So when we say something is big or small, it's something that's usually always big or small, or is always beautiful. So that's more long-standing, more permanent. But this fa'alan is more of an adjective that's for an adjective that exists for a temporary amount of time. Okay? So I've given you, I'm going to write it here and then I'll share my screen. I've given you al-wazn, fa'alan. This is the pattern. And now what I'm doing is I'm giving you 4 sets of roots that you're going to plug into the pattern, and you're going to tell me what those words are. That when you plug those in, what word do you get? Okay? So, if I switch here, we have fa'alan. Remember, we said that the fa, ayn, lam represent the first, second, and third root letter. So when you're trying to go from al-wazn to al-kalima, when you're going from the pattern and you're going to the word, you're switching the fa, ayn, lam with the 1, 2, and 3 root letters. So in the first one, I gave you the root letters. I said the root letters are ta, ayn, and ba, ta, which has to do with being tired. So then you say, okay, the letter fa represents the first, ayn represents the second, lam represents the third, and what's added to this word is you have a fatha, a sukoon, an alif, and a noon. That's what's added to those 3 root letters. Okay? So let's do this now. Shall we? So replace the first letter, fa, with the first here. So here's your 3 root letters. So we're going to plug in. For the first root letter, fa, we're going to replace it with the ta. Okay. And notice here, there is a fatha on top, so we're going to put a fatha on top of it. So anything outside of those 3 letters, whatever else is in the pattern, that you're pulling from the same, you're doing the same exact thing in the word. Okay? The second root letter here, we're going to replace it with an ayn. They're the same letter, so you can keep it the same. And this time it has here sukoon on it, so we're going to put a sukoon on top of it. The lam here is the third root letter. We're going to replace it with the ba. And then you have an alif and a noon at the end. So we're going to add here an alif. Oops, wrong color. And a noon. What word do we get? Ta'aban. Ta'aban means tired. It's an adjective for tired. If I say ana ta'aban, I'm tired. That's an adjective. So this right here, this was the root of the word al-jadar. This was al-wazn. This is the pattern. And then this is the word al-kalima. Okay. So now you're going to do the same exact thing. And I've given you zay, ayn, lam, zal. So you're going to do the same thing. Pause it and come back. Okay, so let's do the same thing. We have, this is our, working with the same wazn, same pattern. We're going to put the zay. Follow it with, here the second root letter is ayn, which is the same thing. Third root letter is a lam, and here the third root letter is a lam, so it stays the same. You're just replacing it with itself. And everything else is additional. Fatha, sukun, alif, nun. So what's the word? Za'alan. Za'alan meaning upset. Za'alan. Okay, let's do the same thing here. Ayn, fa, sheen. Go ahead, do that and come back. Okay, replace it. We have ayn, first letter, second letter, third root letter. So that, everything else we keep the same. And we get atshan, which is thirsty. That's an adjective for being thirsty. So notice, you're not always going to be ta'aban. You're not always going to be tired. You're not always going to be thirsty. You're not always going to be upset. That's why these are adjectives that are temporary. And then let's do the last one. What's the last one I gave you? Ra, ha, mim. Ra, ha, mim. Pause and come back. So first root letter, second root letter, third has a fatha, sukun, alif, nun. Rahman, merciful. Okay. And it's temporary because Rahman has to do with mercy within a specific time period. So now this is how we use roots and patterns. And the way that this is going to help you is when you are reading and you come across words that you don't know, you can understand and say, oh, okay, I know this pattern actually. Or I know that this root letter, I know a word that has, like for instance, we saw khudar in the vocab. Let me do it in green since I stood green. You saw the word khudar. And you say, oh, I don't know that word. But I know another word that has similar letters to it. I know a word that is akhdar. A little bit better. I know a letter that has these three letters. Kha, ba, la, and ra. Kha, ba, ra. I know a letter. I know a word that has those similar letters. Maybe they have something to do with one another. Okay? So this we said was green, which has to do with khudar because khudar are vegetables. Veggies, most of them or a lot of them are green. So this is something that you've seen. You've seen this. So now this is going to help you through context figure out what does a word mean? If I see, for instance, a new adjective. Here's one we haven't done. Khafif. Even if you don't know the meaning and you don't know the root letter, you can say, oh, I think it kind of rhymes with the other adjectives I know. Jameel, Ba'id, Kabir. Has a first letter, has a fatha, then it has a second letter and a ya. This is probably an adjective. Khafif means light. So it's an adjective. Right? So you can figure out through the context based on the root of the word or the pattern of the word what that word might mean. Okay? That's why this system is very helpful. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to cover awzan al-fi'l, which is the present tense verb form. So now that we have al-jadar wal-wazn, we can look at awzan, which are the plural of wazn. It's patterns, right, of verbs. And you should go ahead and open up Al-Kitaab. We're starting on page 74, and this grammar lesson continues on to page 78. Okay, so that's where all of this is coming from. Okay, so we have 10 basic forms, okay, plus a couple of them for verbs. We're only looking right now at present tense, and mudara, present tense verbs. So those adjectives, those were other types of patterns that we saw. Now we're going to look at the ozan, the patterns for verbs. So we have several different patterns. We're only looking at a few of them. Form 1 are what we call base form verbs. These are verbs that are just 3-letter. It's the 3-letter root that you have, and all you're doing is adding the suffix or the prefix that you normally would for the verb. Okay? So, for instance, we have seen the verb. Actually, I'll put it in the huwa form. Yaktub. And yaktub is going to be considered form 1 because if you took off the prefix for huwa, you're left with what? The root letters, kaf, da, ba. So form 1 is just the root letters, right? And then you're simply adding the prefix or the suffix for the verb itself. So if I was to look at the pattern for these types of verbs, and when we're looking at the pattern in this, we're only looking at the huwa form. The pattern is this. It's the letter ya, which is what we conjugate for huwa. We start the verb with ya. And then fa, ain, lam, which represents the first, second, and third root letter. Okay. So that's the pattern. Now what about the harakat? There's 3 different kinds. Within base form verbs, there's 3 different kinds. All 3 of them have a fatha and a sukoon, yaf. And then the ya, the ain, which is the second root letter, can either be yaf'al, yaf'ul, or yaf'il. That's it. Okay. So those are the 3 patterns that you have within form 1. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at this chart. You have yaf'ul, yaf'al, yaf'il. And I gave you an example of a verb that fits each one of those patterns. Yadrus. Darasas has to do with studying. So yadrus, he studies. Notice, ya with the fatha. First root letter has a sukoon. Second root letter has a dhamma. Ending with the third root letter. Yaf'ul, yadrus. They rhyme. What's another verb that you have done in this chapter? Look at the vocab list that you have in your book. And try to tell me, you're going to pause, look through the vocab list, and tell me what's a verb, or write down for yourself rather, what is a verb that fits that pattern? Yaf'ul. There's only 3 letters. There's the ya, and there's only 3 root letters, and there's a dhamma on the second root letter. So tell me, you're going to go through that list, and that vocab list is the beginning of the chapter. So page 64 was 64. What's the very first word in that list? Very first word in that list. Okay, that very first word is ya'kul. First letter is the letter ya here. Then you have your first root letter, which has a sukoon. Just like here, you have your first root letter has a sukoon. Kaf has a dhamma, followed by the last letter. Which means the root of this word is akal, which means to eat, having to eat. Okay? So ya'kul. Okay. Ya'kul, yadrus. Okay. So those are both words that follow. There's one more. What's another? Give me one more. There's another verb that fits this pattern. Pause and come back. Good. I have yaktub. What's another one? What's one that we did in the first chapter? To live. Yaskun. يسكن. So notice all of these, you simply have ya for the huwa, and then you have the three letters, which are your root letters, and the first one takes a sukun, and the second one takes a dhamma in all of them. So they all rhyme. يفعل, يأكل, يكتب, يسكن, يدرس. Right? Okay, now let's look at one that has with fatha. يفعل with a fatha now on that second root letter. Which one did I give you here? يعمل is the one I gave you. So we have done يعمل, where you have the first letter ya, then you have ayn, mim, lam, that's your root, and that second root letter simply has a fatha on it. So go through your list, and you're going to find one that fits this pattern. Okay, what was to memorize? We're putting all of these in the huwa form because we're only looking at huwa. If we're talking about ana, it would be af'ul, af'al, af'al, but we're doing the huwa form with the ya. So yahfad. Notice here the second root letter has a fatha. What's another one? Not to write, but what's to read? Yaqra. To read. So that also fits this pattern. Here's your second root letter, and it has there, and it has there a fatha. And then the last one, yaf'il, when you have a kasra here, like ya'rif. That here's your second root letter, has a kasra. Okay. And you don't have to find an example because that's the only example that we have, that we've done so far, that has that. That is what we consider form 1. Okay, let's look at form 2. Form 2, what happened in form 2? Yufa'il. Yufa'il. What's the difference between form 1 and form 2? What did we add? Look at the 2. What did we add? Good. We added, here we have a dhamma instead on the first, on the ya. And the second root letter, the ayn, takes now a shadda with the kasra. Form 2 is, all the rest of the forms are easy because there's not multiple versions within that form. It is what it is. Form 1 is the only one that has 3 variations. Okay. Yufa'il. Again, it's in the huwa form because it has a ya. Then you have fa, ayn, lam. Those are your 3 root letters. It represents the 3 root letters. And you have a fatha. Excuse me. And the second letter has a shadda with the kasra. So we have yudarris. Yudarris. So let's look at these 2 words because some of you may be confused. What's the difference between these 2? Yadrus, yudarris. Yadrus follows the pattern yaf'ul. Yudarris follows the pattern yufa'il. This is form 1. This is form 2. The meaning of form 2 with the shadda, it usually means that it's causative. It usually means that you take form 1 and you now make someone else do it. So yadrus is to study. He studies. Form 2 means the form 1 verb, you're making someone else do it. So if he makes someone else study, teaches. He teaches. So that's now how you can understand how the the pattern changes the meaning. Okay? So the pattern in Form 1 is just that, the meaning of that verb. The pattern in Form 2 is the meaning of Form 1 verb making someone else do it. Okay? It can also mean to emphasize. It makes it emphatic. Okay? Another word that we actually haven't done this verb. I'm just giving it to you as an example. It won't be on a test or anything. Yusawwir. Yusawwir comes from surah, which is picture. And yusawwir means to take a picture of something. So it's not to picture something, it's to take a picture of something. So now you're doing it to something else. Okay? So that's what that shadda usually does. Okay, let's look at Form 3. What happened to Form 3? So now we have fa, ain, lam. Those are your root letters. What's being added? So of course we have the ya in the beginning because all of these we're looking at the huwa form in present tense. But what's the additional letter here that we have? Good, we're adding an alif here. Okay. Form 3, yufa'il. Yufa'il usually has the meaning of doing that verb with someone or something. Okay. That something else is involved. So the verbs that I gave you, we have yufa'il. We saw the verb in this chapter, yusafir. Yusafir, meaning traveling to. When you travel, you're usually traveling to a place, right? So you're not just doing the action on its own, you're going to a place. Another verb that follows this, we haven't covered this yet, but I'm just giving it to you as an example. Yushahid means he watches. So here he travels or traveling. He watches. When you watch, you're watching something. Watch TV. Watch the kids. Watch the game. There's something else involved. Okay, so that's Form 3. Okay, Form 4 we're going to skip over. We're going to look at Form 5 because, of course, we don't have verbs that fit all of the forms of the verbs, all of these forms yet because we haven't done so many verbs to fit all of these. So Form 5 is yatafa'al. What did we add here? What's being added here? Yatafa'al. So you have the ya, which is for the huwa. Then there's a ta. You're adding a ta in the middle before your first 3 root letters. Your root letters, remember, are fa, ain, lam. So we've added an additional ta, and we have a shadda. So Form 5 is actually Form 2, yufa'il, but we've added a ta. Yatafa'al. Yatafa'al. It's very similar. Yatadhakkar. Yatadhakkar. And Form 5 is a reflexive form. Okay? It's a reflexive form. So it means you're taking the original root letter verb, okay, you're taking Form 1 and you're doing it to yourself. So when we look at the verb, it comes from dhikr or dhakara, which means to remember. When you remember something for yourself, you're reminding. Okay? So remember is to think of something for yourself. Okay, that you're thinking of it yourself. So remember. Yatadhakkar. Okay. There is actually one other form. Let me see if we have this in right here. The verb form for yastami'. Actually, we'll keep this right. Yastami' ila. The root of this is sin, mim, ain, sam, which has to do with listening. And some people, if you speak a dialect, you might be confused because many times in the dialect we use the verb yasma'. Yasma' means to hear something, which is different than yastami'. Yastami' means to listen to something. To hear something is passive. To listen to something is active. Okay? So you tell me what the verb form is here. Pause it and come back. So we're going to take here, we have a ya, and then we have first root letter, second root letter, and third root letter. So we have a fa. Oh, my cat's walking around. We have the letter ta. And then we have right here and right here, second and third, we're going to replace it with, remember, fa, ayn lam is what we replace it with. يفتعل. يفتعل. And in this form, you're active. You're actively doing the first verb form. So the original verb is yasma, which is to hear. And when you add this ta, now it means you're actively doing that. You're not just hearing, you're listening. Okay? So for the purpose of this chapter, I don't care for you to memorize all the meanings of the verb forms and what they do. But it's just to give you an understanding when you see and when you read and when you hear these verbs, to help you understand the context, to help you figure out what the meaning of that verb is, okay? And to help you understand what are the roots. Because maybe you know a root letter, maybe you know a word that has similar root letters, and it'll help you figure out what the meaning of that verb is. Or maybe you know another verb that rhymes with it, and so you can figure out what type of word it is. Okay, so those are the root patterns. And then we want to cover negating present tense. نفي الفعل المضارع. Negating present tense is very easy. You guys already know this. When you put la in front of a verb, it means you negate it. لا تتذكر اسمي. You don't remember my name. لا تتذكر اسمي. So تتذكر اسمي, you remember my name. لا تتذكر اسمي, you don't remember my name. Okay, you read the next couple ones and then come back. Pause and come back. لا يعمل في المكتبة. So what does he not do? لا يعمل, he doesn't work in the library. لا ندرس الفرنسية. فرنسية is what? French. What do we not study? French. We don't study French. أدرس العربية. لا ندرس الفرنسية. Okay? And then you can actually use negation with a yes or no question. Meaning, don't you do this? Don't you know this? Don't you memorize this? Don't you work there? So when you want to start a question with don't, we say a and la. So instead of using hal, we just use a. Ala. Ala means don't as a question. ألا تعرفين الموظف الجديد? Don't you, أنتِ تعرفين, don't you know الموظف الجديد? What is الموظف الجديد? Employee new, the new employee. Don't you know the new employee? ألا تتذكرون اسمي? ألا تتذكرون اسمي? Don't you guys remember my name? Okay. So in that, what are we doing? We have one typo here. We're just doing a question with negation. Okay, ألا. Okay, ضمائر النصب, we're going to come back to this. But for right now, I want you to just practice those verbs.